listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and I primarily help people who are dealing with infidelity. I help people who are cheating or have been cheating. I help people who have been cheated on. And it is my honor and my pleasure to provide shame-free, blame-free, non-judgmental coaching to folks in all sorts of infidelity situations. So if you are dealing with an infidelity situation of your own and you would like some help sorting it out, you can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website. I provide confidential, compassionate coaching via Zoom so we can work together no matter where you're located. All right, today we are going to talk about making decisions. There are times in life when it seems like we only have bad options to choose from. There are moments when it may seem like our only choice is between doing one thing we really don't want to do and doing another thing we don't really want to do. Or put a little differently, there are times when it seems like our only options are shitty option A or shitty option B. And this can be true in any area of our life, of course, but since this podcast is primarily about infidelity, I'll give you a few examples of what this might look like in infidelity-related situations. Maybe you cheated on your partner once and you feel really bad about it. And on the one hand, you think there might be value in telling your partner what happened because in general, you think honesty is really important. But on the other hand, you're as sure as you can be that you won't cheat on your partner again. And you're pretty sure that telling them about what happened will upset them and perhaps create all kinds of difficulties in your relationship. So you don't really like the idea of keeping your secret, but you also don't think telling your partner about what you did is such a great idea either. Or maybe you are married and you have been having an affair. And you're pretty sure that you want to leave your marriage and pursue an official relationship with your affair partner, but you're terrified of getting divorced. You know that you could end your affair and stay in your marriage and not have to deal with a divorce, or you could go through with a divorce and be free to continue your relationship with your affair partner, or you could continue your affair and stay married. And you may recognize that each of those options is technically available to you, but the drawbacks associated with each of those options may seem so significant that it doesn't really seem like you have any choice at all. Or here's another one. Maybe you are involved with someone who is married and you're not married, and you've been involved with this person for a long time, and you're really invested in your relationship with them, and you care about them so much, and your person has told you over and over again that they want to leave their marriage and be with you. But time has passed and not much has happened. Maybe months have gone by, maybe years have gone by, and maybe you're starting to think that your person is never going to leave their spouse. And thinking about that possibility might fill you with dread and sadness and maybe some fear and resentment and perhaps a whole bunch of other feelings too. And on the one hand, you might not want to give up on the hope that your person will leave their spouse. And you might not want to give up on the hope that your relationship with them has a real chance. But on the other hand, you may not want to continue waiting like you have been for very much longer. I want to suggest that in each of these scenarios, the most fundamental, essential point is that no matter what you choose to do, you are going to experience some discomfort. And by discomfort, I mean any feeling that you don't want to feel or that it doesn't feel good to feel. And that might be guilt. It might be fear. It might be sadness. It might be anger. It might be grief. It might be despair. It might be none of those things or all of those things. When we resist certain experiences in life, or when we resist making decisions, In essence, it is because we do not want to feel the uncomfortable feelings we think we will feel if certain things happen. So if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've probably heard me say this before. It is never the facts of our lives that make us feel the feelings we experience. We think that's the way it works, but it isn't. It's what we think about the facts of our lives that creates our feelings. So when we say things like, well, I don't want to get divorced because I know it will be horrible, what we really mean is that we think getting divorced will make us feel horrible, and we don't want to feel horrible. And of course, it is quite possible that getting divorced might entail some horrible feelings, but that isn't because divorce is fundamentally or inevitably a horrible experience. It's because of our particular thoughts about the details of our own divorce. And this is a really important distinction, but it isn't the point that I'm going to focus on today. The point that I'm going to emphasize today is that there are very likely going to be times in your life, whether or not you are ever dealing with infidelity, in which the only options in front of you are uncomfortable for you. Sometimes you'll reach a fork in the road and you won't like the idea of any of the paths forward. So just to return to the examples I gave earlier, the prospect of telling someone you cheated on them may sound excruciatingly uncomfortable. And the prospect of keeping the information to yourself may also sound really uncomfortable, but uncomfortable in a different way. Staying in a marriage you aren't happy in, to be clear, will pretty much guarantee you some discomfort. And getting divorced is probably going to be uncomfortable too. Choosing to wait and see if someone you're in love with will leave their spouse for you is an experience that you might find quite unpleasant in some respects. And deciding to officially stop waiting and close off the possibility that the relationship might work out in the indefinite future may also be an experience that comes with some pretty unpleasant feelings. And when we're in a situation like this, when we're faced with two options we don't really like, we may think that this is tremendously unfair or inconvenient, or perhaps impossible for us to deal with. When I work with folks who are in situations like these, or are dealing with any set of options that they don't like, they often protest. And there are many different ways of doing this. And one way is talking about the past. For instance, saying things like, well, if I had just ended my marriage 10 years ago, I wouldn't be in this situation right now. Or if I'd never gotten involved with this person who's married to someone else in the first place, I wouldn't be sitting around waiting for them and crying every night right now. Or if I hadn't gotten drunk that night and slept with that mildly attractive person my coworker brought to the bar, I would never be faced with having to tell my partner or deciding to not tell my partner about some incident that I wasn't even really that excited about or invested in the first place. So, here's the thing. It is fairly common to lament our past decisions instead of focusing on the decision before us in the present when we don't really like the stakes of the decision in front of us in the present. I totally get it. I have indulged in the whole, if I had done something different back then, I wouldn't be here now line of thinking. But let me tell you, even if it is totally understandable to indulge in any number of tactics like focusing on the past rather than attending to the present when we feel uncomfortable with the present options, it isn't actually helpful to do this. Actually, that's not exactly true. Ruminating on the past is a great way to avoid dealing with the present. And if that is your agenda, then focusing on the past is helpful. Lamenting the unfairness of your situation is helpful if you want to avoid dealing with the present. And let me be clear, you might have the option to avoid making a decision between shitty option A and shitty option B And many people do exercise that option, and sometimes for weeks or months or even years or decades on end. And I want to be clear about a really important distinction here. There are times when it makes sense to hold off on making a choice. Sometimes doing nothing is actually a pretty good idea. Sometimes it does make sense to wait and see what develops in some regard before we commit to a decision. But that is not what I'm talking about right now. I am talking about kicking the can down the road indefinitely because that seems easier or less scary or less uncomfortable than making a choice. And here's the thing with kicking the can down the road. Sometimes we do it pretty consciously, and sometimes we do it very unconsciously or not fully consciously. And what I want to emphasize is that whether you put off a decision consciously or not, making a decision, I'm going to say the whole sentence again. What I want to emphasize is that whether you put off making a decision consciously or unconsciously, not making a decision is a decision in and of itself. Putting off a choice is a choice in and of itself. And like any other choice, this one will have consequences. And moreover, sometimes delaying a decision creates just as much discomfort, if not more, as actually making a decision. Sitting in limbo or avoiding a decision can be pretty unpleasant in the short term, and it can create even more discomfort in the long term. So if you've been kicking the can down the road in an attempt to avoid making a decision and avoid feeling discomfort, this is totally human and totally understandable, but it doesn't tend to work out all that well. It doesn't tend to get us more of what we really want. So you may be wondering why we wouldn't want to avoid discomfort, because after all, discomfort is uncomfortable. And most of us don't like feeling uncomfortable. Well, as I've said before on this podcast, discomfort is a normal, natural, and inevitable part of the human experience. So it behooves us to make friends with discomfort, or at least become willing to tolerate discomfort. The naturally occurring spectrum of human emotions is broad, and it contains feelings that we may not consider pleasant or nice or fun to feel. And that's okay. What if that's fine? What if that's not a problem? Another thing that makes discomfort difficult to deal with, aside from the sheer sensations of the experience, is that in our society, we tend to pathologize certain emotions. We tend to pathologize the so-called negative emotions. But what if emotions aren't inherently negative? What if they may feel unpleasant to feel, but what if that doesn't mean they're bad? And in addition to pathologizing certain emotions, we also tend to layer all sorts of meanings on top of our uncomfortable feelings that aren't necessarily all that helpful. So here are a few examples of what that might look like, examples of what layering meanings onto our uncomfortable feelings might look like in practice. If we're facing a choice and we don't know what option we want to choose, we may feel confused. And we may then tell ourselves that our confusion is a sign that the decision we're facing is really hard. And believe me, telling ourselves that something is hard is not helpful. And perhaps more specifically, telling ourselves that a decision is hard may seem like a great reason to put off making the decision. Or if we're feeling a choice and we feel sad when we anticipate the possible consequences of a choice, we may make that mean that the option we're considering, the one that might lead us to feel sad, is the wrong choice. And of course, if we're facing a decision and we feel conflicted about what we want, we may use that feeling of conflict as a reason why we shouldn't make a choice at all. We may use that feeling of conflict as proof that we don't know what we want. And doing this, adding these layers of meaning to our experiences of uncomfortable feelings, just makes the whole decision-making process that much more convoluted. We are not doing ourselves any favors when we analyze our feelings to death or make all kinds of meanings out of them or use our feelings as indications of what we should or shouldn't do. It's not to say that feelings don't have their uses, but as the Buddhist nun Pema Chodron exhorts us, we have the opportunity to feel our feelings and drop our stories. Feel our feelings and drop our stories. When we can let go of our stories about why we feel the way we feel or what events in our lives led us to our current predicament and our current feeling state, we're better able to attend to the matters at hand. When we let ourselves feel our feelings instead of telling ourselves stories about our feelings and what our feelings mean and why we feel them, we can move through our feelings of discomfort more efficiently. And when we can drop the whole story that discomfort itself is inherently bad, and that therefore discomfort is something that we shouldn't have to experience, we can then experience discomfort with a whole lot less suffering. I don't know who said this first, but there's a great quote out there that holds that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And I would just rephrase that slightly to say that discomfort is inevitable, but suffering as a result of our discomfort is optional. When we know this, and when we know that discomfort is something we can tolerate rather than something we need to avoid, we can start making decisions knowing that there may not be an easy answer or a comfortable path forward, and knowing that that's okay. And then we can start to make decisions with the priority of honoring our truths and fostering our own growth and evolution and being our own stewards in life, instead of making decisions based on the priority of staying comfortable or safe or whatever. And from there, more options open up to us. That's the whole point. It isn't that it's morally better to be willing to tolerate discomfort instead of trying to avoid it or anything like that. It's just that being okay with discomfort will have different ramifications or different consequences for us in our lives than resisting discomfort will. And if we want to make changes of any kind in our life, this is really important to recognize and embrace. Change, pretty much by definition, involves discomfort. Probably also involves some other things too, but there will be some discomfort involved. And not only that, not changing also usually involves discomfort. So to apply some of the things I've been talking about to the examples I used earlier, if we've cheated on our partner and we're trying to decide whether to tell them or not, our decision-making process can change when we accept that whatever we choose to do has the potential to be uncomfortable for us. If we don't tell our partner and we value honesty, we may feel guilty. And if we do tell them, we may feel scared and nervous leading up to the conversation. We may also hope that telling them will make us feel better. And we may feel relief after we share our secrets. But it's also possible that our partner will then be upset with us or break up with us, and we might have some pretty uncomfortable feelings about that. So the point is that instead of looking for a course of action that will allow us to avoid discomfort, we can recognize that discomfort is inevitable and from there make decisions about what to do about our situation that are in line with our larger goals and desires and priorities. Maybe your goal is to be honest with your partner no matter what. Or maybe it's more important to you to be judicious in what you share and decide to the best of your ability if you think sharing your infidelity situation with them is going to be helpful or not. And you get to decide what that means, what it means for something to be helpful or not. Another example that I see a lot in my coaching practice is that people who are unhappily married and have kids are reluctant to leave their marriage because they think doing so will mean they will see less of their children. And here's the thing, that might be true. And if you are in this sort of situation, if you're married and thinking about divorce, but not wanting to see any less of your kids, you may, have a lot of feelings about this prospect. And it's true. It's possible that if you get divorced and you see less of your kids, that might be excruciatingly sad for you. You might have those feelings. You might have all kinds of other uncomfortable feelings too. But here's the thing. Staying put in your marriage may also be excruciating in other ways. So the question in situations like this is, what do we ultimately want in our relationships or in any other area of our lives? And which choices can we make now that will help get us closer to what we ultimately want more of? So if I'm unhappy in my marriage and I know that I want to leave that relationship, I might choose to tolerate the discomfort that comes with getting divorced and comes with seeing less of my kids, because I know that any choice I make would be uncomfortable in one way or another. And B, the choice to get divorced is essential to me getting to experience more of what I want to experience as a human with a finite number of years of life on this planet. Now, I could, in this example, of course, choose to stay in the marriage I'm unhappy in because I prefer that discomfort to the discomfort I anticipate would come from getting divorced and spending less time with my kids. And that is a fair choice to make. The point is not that it's bad to choose familiar discomfort over unfamiliar discomfort. The point is that it is important to be aware that choosing familiar discomfort comes with particular benefits, and choosing unfamiliar discomfort comes with particular benefits. Choosing familiar discomfort generally means that we get to keep on dealing with the devil we know, so to speak. And choosing unfamiliar discomfort usually means that we get to deal with change and uncertainty. But that's also the benefit. We get change and new possibilities. The other thing that happens when we decide we're going to be willing to tolerate discomfort instead of avoiding it is that we can make choices more efficiently. And I'm not suggesting that we ever have to be in a rush to make choices, but languishing in indecision is not the same thing as not rushing. Making choices more efficiently can be helpful in any situation, but it may be particularly helpful when it seems like all of the choices we have available to us are bad or are likely to lead to discomfort. When we can choose between shitty option A and shitty option B more efficiently, we gain access to options we like better more efficiently. Let's say we've been ignoring our dissatisfaction within our marriage for years, and then we had an affair, and then people found out about the affair, and then our life kind of blew up, and a bunch of things happened that we found really, really difficult and unpleasant to deal with. And let's say we're contending with all sorts of stuff as a result of the fallout. Or let's turn the tables here. Maybe we were cheated on, and the whole thing took us completely by surprise. And it seems like the universe is handing us a shit sandwich. And the whole experience seems totally unfair to us. And we think our lives are being totally upended. And we've found ourselves in the position of having to make a bunch of choices we don't think we should have to make. And we are not happy about any of this at all. Here's the thing. Sometimes shit happens. Sometimes the universe hands us a shit sandwich, so to speak. When this occurs, being willing to deal with our discomfort and make the decisions we aren't thrilled about having to make is going to move us in the direction of having more options. Resisting discomfort and resisting making decisions will probably keep us more or less where we are, or keep us where we are for longer. And so ironically, by resisting discomfort, we tend to create more of it. If we don't like where we are, we have to be willing to deal with where we are in order to get to something we like better. Might sound paradoxical, but in order to make change, we have to accept where we are now. We have to make peace with present conditions in order to create new ones. And part of that means being willing to say, okay, these are my choices. They may all lead to discomfort. Which flavor of discomfort do I prefer? Which flavor of discomfort will allow me to eventually make my way closer to more of what I want to experience in my life? All right, everyone. I know it is one thing to hear me talk about this stuff on the podcast, and it's another thing entirely to apply the concepts I discuss to your own life. So if you would like my help doing that, let's work together. You can schedule an introductory coaching session with me today through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. As I mentioned earlier, I offer confidential, compassionate coaching via Zoom so we can work together no matter where you're located. I look forward to speaking with you. As always, everyone, I thank you so much for listening. And if you have enjoyed what you've heard today, I would appreciate it if you would head on over to iTunes to rate and review the podcast. I'll talk to you next week. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.